Olá, daqui é Rafaela Cortês. A entrevista que vais ouvir foi gravada durante a produção da série Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina. Se ainda não a ouviste, aconselho-te a fazeres isso primeiro e depois voltares aqui. Yara Hawari é uma investigadora e escritora palestiniana. É co-diretora do think tank Al-Shabaka, que investiga e analisa políticas no contexto palestiniano. Yara fez todo o seu percurso académico em política do Médio Oriente na Universidade de Exeter, no Reino Unido. Podes encontrá-la frequentemente como comentadora política em órgãos de comunicação internacionais como The Guardian e Al Jazeera. Em 2021, publicou um primeiro romance, The Stone House. Yara Hawari ri-se quando lhe perguntamos sobre o que é. É, obviamente, sobre a Palestina, sobre o trauma intergeracional palestiniano e a sua sobrevivência à ocupação israelita. Esta entrevista é em inglês. Foi gravada em 2022, por mim e pelo Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro, na Fundação e Centro Cultural Al-Katan, em Tire, Ramallah, na Palestina. Falamos de 3 grandes tópicos: a Autoridade Palestiniana, referida como PA na sigla em inglês, a Agência das Nações Unidas para a Assistência aos Refugiados da Palestina, ou UNRWA, e a Ajuda Internacional ao Desenvolvimento. Yara Hawari explica porque é que olha para a Indústria da Ajuda como um mecanismo neocolonial e descreve as condições e impactos do seu financiamento. Reflete também sobre a coordenação de segurança das Forças Armadas palestinianas com os israelitas, os efeitos dos projetos de normalização do projeto sionista e o que foi possível atingir com a tentativa de financiar a construção de um estado na Palestina sem antes acabar com a colonização. Sabe também que esta conversa aconteceu antes da administração Trump ter desmantelado a Agência dos Estados Unidos para o Desenvolvimento Internacional, a USAID, em julho de 2025. Fica com a entrevista a Yara Hawari.
Palestinians have a long tradition of oral history, not just as Arabs. It's a huge part of Arab and Middle Eastern culture, but also since the Nakba in 1948, a lot of our material history was destroyed, and since 1948 has been consecutively looted. The Israelis are very keen to steal artifacts, archives, documents, this kind of thing.
Yeah, it happened in Beirut during the siege.
It happened in 1982. It happened in the Nakba. It happened in 1967. And so, as a consequence, a lot of our our material history we don't have access to. So oral history became very quickly a way to preserve our narrative in the absence of material history. And so there became, I don't want to say an over-reliance, but a very heavy emphasis on preserving Palestine through oral history. And different periods we've seen a resurgence of oral history used. I don't know if you experience this in Lebanon, but Palestinian refugees know with intricate detail the places that they're from, their families are from, even though their grandparents were there. And it's because of oral history, right? It's because of transgenerational oral history. And in Palestine, it's used a lot by Palestinians in the 48 territories. So I'm sure you're familiar with all the terminology, but when I say 48, I'm referring to Israel. But it's used a lot by them because the landscape, is completely changed. Israel has worked so hard to completely disrupt the landscape. And so for a lot of, it's interesting, through my research, I noticed that a lot of Palestinians, especially the ones who are more politically aware, they have they see something that's alternate in front of them. They don't see what's actually in front of them. They see, I always imagine it like a map, and then the Israeli infrastructure is like that tracing paper. And so it adds another layer, but when you take that paper off, there's the original layer. So I feel like Palestinians there are always just seeing the original layer. They can look past the colonial infrastructure and they see the old villages that were destroyed.
And they call it the original names and
Exactly. For example, my dad, he always made sure to tell me the names of places that are not on maps and not on signs, but are embedded in our collective narrative.
We saw that a lot in Beirut. People, I think maybe the most politically engaged, but we asked them where they're from. They tell us the name of a village they've never been to, that some don't even exist in that way anymore. So definitely, I think that's a very big part, especially being away from being in Lebanon. They need to kind of rely on the oral history to
And so it's not even just, it's very important for diaspora communities and refugee communities, but also like the point is that it's important for Palestinians even still in Palestine, because the land that has changed so much that it's difficult to see. And not everyone does it. There's a lot of Palestinians that will refer to places their Israeli names because they don't know, right? Like it's been changed. So
and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Jerusalem. I lived in Jerusalem until I was 12, and then we moved to England, and then I moved back from England to Palestine in probably 12 years later. So when I was 12 years later.
And so you lived in Jerusalem. Then when you went back to Ramallah,
so I came back to Jerusalem when I moved back to Palestine 10 years ago. I moved back to Jerusalem, and then I couldn't, and so I came to Ramallah.
And for how long have you been in Ramallah?
I've been in Ramallah nearly 5 years.
Okay. And how do you see the change in Ramallah? We were talking about the economic aspect, but also, I mean, maybe you can call it the gentrification of Ramallah. How is that present in your
It's
life?
really gross. It's really, and I'm seeing it happen very quickly. This neighborhood that we're in now actually is called Tire neighborhood, and it's considered a very bourgeoisie neighborhood. But actually, it wasn't always the case. This was actually considered a far out neighborhood, not really close or connected to Ramallah. And it was still, there were some areas that were very bourgeoisie, and there was some parts that are more working class. But this area, the road from Ramallah to Tire, it's becoming like Amman. Ramallah is becoming like a mini Amman, all these chains of fast food joints and whatever, and very tall buildings, and very even very fancy, middle upper class establishments, which doesn't serve the majority of the population, because the majority of the Palestinian population is working class. So
who does it serve then?
It serves the people that live in the center of Ramallah, the bourgeoisie, the middle class, the upper classes, the elites. And you see that in Ramallah, really, there's certain central areas where the roads are very nice, the pavements are very good, there are rubbish bins, there are obviously services. There's a joke that here in Tire they have a place where you can take your recycling. We don't have recycling in Palestine, right? But they set up this place, and we think it's just to make people feel like they live in the West, that they can recycle their things, because we don't have a recycling plant in Palestine. So what happens? So we think that they just take the recycling and just put it in the dump. But so the people of Tire can feel they're not being deprived of a Western lifestyle, because the West is all into their recycling now. So, yeah.
So do you feel that life in Palestine kind of follows with the Western agenda of what they think is progress, or what they think is the way that people should live their lives?
I think we have to distinguish between Palestine and Ramallah. Ramallah is this project of the PA, which by default is a project of the Western donor community, right? It's what they want to be the capital of the Palestinian state. And so obviously it's injected with a lot of money. It's injected with this, they give it a brush of paint. They try and make it look nice, so that when diplomats and delegations come to Ramallah, they only see the nice parts, and they think, what? Oh my God, this is a state. This is it's a capital. It's a Middle Eastern capital. They don't see the refugee camp that's just behind the nicely painted wall. They don't see the slightly more working class areas. So Ramallah is very different to the rest of Palestine. It's not a real city. It's a fake city. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't have Ramallah used to be a village. When I lived in Jerusalem in the 90s as a child, I remember coming to Ramallah as a day out in the countryside, by the way, and there was nothing here.
It's interesting, the first of 6 episodes of the series I published in 2018 is called Ramallah, the Artificial City.
Yeah, it's a fake. It's not a real city, and I think you really feel that when you go to some of Palestine's older cities. So if you go to Nablus and Hebron, I mean, there's still all these like really horrible aspects of capitalism very obviously present in those cities, but there is still like a historic heart. You can feel it, and like there is still like the market. You can feel Ramallah doesn't have that same energy, and because it's not real, it was never meant to be a city. It was forced into being a city.
And you said Ramallah is the project of the donor community. What does that mean?
The PA is the donor community's baby. They are basically what keeps the Palestinian people subdued, repressed. They are like, in every colonial context, there's always been like a local police force that the colonialists used to, like, rather than they get their hands dirty, they employ a local police force to suppress the indigenous or the native population. And this is what the PA is in Palestine. It's used to sort of control the Palestinians and to give all these fake trappings of a government, a state. And it's not a state. It's these pockets of not even autonomy, because even if the Palestinian president wants to leave Ramallah, he has to inform the Israeli army that he's moving from one Palestinian place to another Palestinian place. So there isn't Palestinian Authority at all, or autonomy in these areas. And the PA is completely reliant on donor money. Like it's propped up by foreign money. It cannot survive without that money.
Where from?
From Europe, from the States, also from Middle Eastern countries as well. Different donors fund different things. The security, the Palestinian Authority security apparatus is actually the largest sector that operates within the PA. It takes, I think, around 60% of the budget, which is more than the budget of agriculture, health, and education combined. The security sector is what? It's the police, mukhabarat, the secret police, the presidential guard, the riot police. They have now a women's battalion that they bring out to arrest us, so that the male police officers don't have to. And that's thanks to the EU, who wanted to make sure that the security services were gender-friendly. So now women get arrested just as much as the men. And so this is, this is the biggest sector. And I think that tells you a lot, everything that you need to know about what the PA is. It's a security body.
And does that funding for the PA, especially in these other sectors like education, health, does that come with strings attached?
Yes, it does. All of the money that comes into Palestine comes with strings attached, even if people argue otherwise. There is, there'll be project funding, there'll be core funding. The biggest string attached to the PA is the security coordination. I don't know if you know what the security coordination is, but actually today during the funeral, the mourners were chanting at the door of the Muqata'a, down with the security coordination, which was very brave, and I'll tell you why now. The security coordination is an agreement between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli regime, and it's one of the outcomes of Oslo. And basically, the Palestinian Authority security services have to cooperate in its entirety with the Israeli regime. So that includes the sharing of information, like secret information, the sharing of whereabouts of like activists. Also in terms of movement, if the Israeli army wants to come into areas A of the West Bank, then the Israelis will just tell the PA that they're coming in and that the police have to go and hide. They've been known to deliver the coordinates and the whereabouts of activists, Palestinian activists, including one who was assassinated by the Israelis. His name's Basil al-Arash. He was a big activist in Ramallah. or well known in Ramallah, and that it's pretty certain that the Palestinian Authority gave the Israelis his location
and
to kill
why?
him. Because activists, especially those with sort of on the left, are in opposition to the Palestinian Authority, because the PA is a dictatorial regime, essentially. And so there is a hard crackdown on the leftists, not only by the PA, but the Israelis as well. The Israeli prisons are full of sort of different groups of people, but we can generalize into two camps, leftists and Islamists. Those are the people that fill the Israeli jails because they're afraid of opposition to the PA, because the PA is their puppet and it does what it needs to do. It doesn't misbehave. So everyone wants the status quo here, including the donor community, because PA keeps things nice and like calm and stable. So for example, when there was talk of elections, so there's in Palestine, there's always, or in the West Bank and Gaza, there's always these discussions of elections because the president is now a decade and a half past his electoral mandate. And then he uses all kinds of excuses. This time some people thought there might be elections, but the donor community is afraid of elections. So they talk about democracy, rule of law. But in a lot of conversations I had with diplomats, they said, yes, but what if the Palestinian people vote in Hamas? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, yes, what if? I mean, that's democracy. Like, you can't come to us and be like, we're bringing you, like, the fucking Americans, like, we're going to bomb the democracy out of you. Like, they're like, they want us to have democracy, but not that kind of democracy. And that's what happened in the past, in 2006, when Gaza elected Hamas to run their government. People in Gaza were punished for exercising democracy. And there were sanctions, and then there was a blockade. So the reality is that, there's all this like chat about, democratizing the PA and whatever, but people with money and people in power are very happy with the current situation.
But when you link that to the strings attached, are you suggesting that they are giving money and donating money in order for the Palestinian people not to have elections?
So no, I think the international community, for the most part, we like to have elections as long as it maintains the status quo. So for them, they're worried about it. They know that there needs to be elections here so that they can justify, continuing to give so much money to the PA. But at the same time, there's that worry that they know that the PA is not as popular as it should be to win an election. So if it means that the PA is going to oppress the opposition, it's going to imprison people, Israel is going to, throw a lot of the opposition into jails, they're also okay with that. So it's not explicit, these strings attached, but there is a context, and they know that under occupation, under military occupation, you can't actually have a proper democracy. You can't. What is elections under occupation? What is the point in having elections under occupation when most of the brightest and radical leaders are in jail?
Mm-hmm. But it does seem like when you speak to people who either work in local organizations, mostly people who work in local organizations here, that the strings attached are actually very real and direct. I mean,
so in that there are strings attached, but what I'm saying is that the ones with regards to democracy are not so heavily implied. Now, the other strings attached we're talking not PA, we're talking the NGOs, civil society. There are very clear strings attached to funding, whether it's project or core funding. Project funding, which is increasingly the majority of funding being made available as project funding, it's very difficult to deal with because you have to create these projects to keep your organization afloat. And so it means that you end up doing a lot more work because you don't have the core funding that you need to maintain an organization. But strings attached include, the EU clause about political affiliations to potential terrorist parties. There's a lot of strings attached when it comes to...
Can you explain what's that clause?
So the clause is the EU basically brought in this, or re-emphasized this clause in its funding, that no money can go to people who are affiliated with political parties that the EU considers terrorist. And so that means that if you're an organization, you have to vet everyone involved in anything you do and check out their political affiliations, right? And so the Europeans say that this wasn't a new thing. They were just re-highlighting that this is part of their agreements. But obviously, they came under pressure from the Israelis. Now, Palestinian civil society, the majority of Palestinian civil society organizations are leftist, not affiliated necessarily, but people make that false affiliation often. And the Israelis do it all the time. To be affiliated with a political party for the Israelis, like, you can just be in the same room as someone from a political party and they consider that affiliation, and you can go to prison for a long time. There was one case that Damir, the prisoner support organization, they documented that a boy served coffee to someone in a political party, and he was charged and sentenced on the grounds of affiliation because he served a cup of coffee. So affiliation is a very loose and vague term that the Israelis use to imprison and incarcerate Palestinians. So when the Europeans are also using it, that's also a problem.
So one of the other things that a lot of people were telling us was that also the for example, being associated with the BDS movement, calling Israel's regime apartheid, that is all that makes you like not get money to run your organizations. Do you also see that?
Yeah, so BDS affiliation is also a big one. But I feel like these things are less explicit. So when we're talking about strings attached, there are things literally in writing, and there are things that are just told to you. And they're like, no, if you are like, you can't do work that is related to BDS, you're not going to get the funding next year. Like, you will be told that to your face, but they won't put it in writing, right? Because BDS has been found by many European courts as legitimate and legal. So they can't actually say it because it would be illegal, right, for them, according to their own domestic law. But the pressure that they face from the Israeli lobby is immense when it comes to BDS. So having sort of affiliations also with BDS can be problematic, but that's also very difficult for the Europeans. Because BDS is a tool that has been decided, or a movement that was agreed upon by Palestinian civil society consensus. So that means everyone in Palestinian civil society supports BDS more or less, except for the few normalizers here and there that we don't need to talk about. But so there are a lot of Europeans that are very realistic. Like, they can't demand that of Palestinian civil society because it means that they won't fund anywhere. They won't have anywhere to put their money. So there's like, the restrictions are like, it depends who you're dealing with. Different European countries have different domestic pressures. So it really depends who you're dealing with. And they'll send you a message in a certain way that you should do this or work on this. And language as well. The way you talk about things, like in reporting, they won't be able to use, like, we're a think tank, we produce policy papers, and we don't have any internal censorship, and we don't accept any funding that requires us to have any censorship. But in their own reporting about our work, and I'm just saying this hypothetically, but in reporting about our work, for example, where we'll say something as where we'll call the Israeli regime apartheid, they won't. Or if there's a project, we won't, no one's going to fund us a project on like Israeli apartheid. So, you find ways to like talk about different aspects of apartheid, maybe without using apartheid in the project proposal. And then you do what you want off record.
and how do you then, if you, for example, if you don't go through the route of USAID, EU funding, the big donors that give maybe millions and billions of dollars to Palestine and are the ones that can maybe actually make a difference in the big organizations, like what is the alternative? What is, for example, alternative in Al Shabaka?
So I should also just say that there is a difference, at least in perception and acceptance of USAID and European money, right? There is a big taboo when it comes to USAID and the damage it's done and the kind of projects it's involved in. And especially now, most of the USAID money goes towards normalization projects, which most Palestinian society is against. You know what normalization is, yes?
Can you explain?
Yeah, but you should explain that.
Okay. So anti-normalization is a coin that was termed during the First Intifada by Palestinians who basically said that this term describes refusing treating Israel as a normal entity. And it was predominantly directed at Palestinians to say, no, you should not engage in projects with Israelis. It's not a normal entity; it's an occupying entity. It was then expanded and it's a core tenet of BDS. So boycott, divestment, and sanctions. A big part of the movement is anti-normalization. So we won't. Let me give you some tangible examples. So I won't take part in a project that seeks to bring Israelis and Palestinians together to have a chit chat and have a cup of tea. Like, I'm not going to do that. And there are several reasons for this. It's not just a principled reason, which is like, why should we sit down with our oppressors? But there's also, it's strategic. During the 80s and 90s, there was a huge amount of attempts to get Palestinians to engage in dialogue with Israelis and to kind of like put differences aside and forget about the context, etc. And they all failed, obviously. None of them brought about our liberation or equal rights. It was very clearly, not a successful path. Because
peace building now.
Yeah, it's because it's fundamentally flawed. Why are you building peace in a colonial context? You should end the colonial state, and then we can talk about like how what works in a decolonized state or system. So then it's it's been developed since then, that term, and it's generally accepted, again, by consensus, by Palestinian civil society, that Palestinians should not take part in normalization. Now, there are, of course, normalizers, different Palestinian organizations, not that many, but there are some. What they get out of it is, they're elevated to positions of grandeur, they get a lot of, privileges, I guess, maybe like permits or something. But, the biggest normalizers are also in the private sector. There's a lot of Palestinian businessmen have deals and connections with Israelis and Israeli businessmen. And the point is that this is at the expense of the Palestinian people. Normalization can be done in a good situation. It's always at the expense of the continued oppression of the Palestinian people. And we know that the Israeli regime and, Zionists, they always use normalization projects as an example to show how great they are, not as a self-reflection and critique of oppression.
So all of these, especially after Oslo, with all these continuing aid projects going on and these billions of dollars throughout the decades poured into Palestine, where has all the money gone?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, you can look around in Ramallah and see that a lot of money has been spent on Ramallah. A lot of the money has gone into the private sector. A lot of the money has gone into the pockets of the few and not the many, because we have all these residential projects being built. I don't know if you've heard of Rawabi or you've been to Rawabi.
We haven't been, but we heard a lot about, yeah.
We have what is the housing crisis in Palestine? What is the housing issue in Palestine? Surely it's, the refugees. Surely it's the working classes. Why the hell are you building like a Palestinian town that's full of apartments for like middle and upper middle class families? Why, and why are you building it so it looks like a settlement, an Israeli settlement? It looks like an Israeli settlement. It's not by coincidence. Al-Arabi was built with a lot of normalization. There were also Israeli architects involved. They stole land from Palestinian villages. It's exactly what settlers do. It is the Palestinian settlement. So there's a lot of stupid business ventures like this. There's a lot of, the money has been wasted, and it's gone on building up the PA, on cementing its hold over the Palestinian people. Remember, I told you that 60% of the money goes to the security forces. The security infrastructure is pretty deep as well.
And obviously, economically, you can actually just see where the money went to, but also what was the result in the Palestinian struggle of that framework of aid work, of the aid work industry here.
So, I think you've already said this, but, one of the biggest consequences of Oslo to, let's say, Palestinian civil society was the depoliticization of those organizations and spaces, and a turn from a sort of a liberationist discourse to one of state building. And that was one of the biggest and most damaging consequences of Oslo.
What does that mean, the state building project?
The state building project, the Oslo Accords, was based on the two-state formula, which would see the Palestinian state in the areas that were occupied in 1967, so the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and that the state of Israel would have the areas that it occupied in 1948, and then maybe there would be some kind of land swaps here or there, agreements. So the Oslo Accords were based on this. It was considered a very historic deal. You have this image that's forever enshrined in our memories of Yasser Arafat and Rabin shaking hands on the White House lawn, and Bill Clinton looking very happy with himself.
And Abu Mazen also right next.
And what it was supposed to do was supposed to set about a phased or staged process which would achieve a Palestinian state within an interim period of 5 years, and the Palestinian Authority would just be this interim governing body before a government was elected and the Palestinian state was established. Yeah. And then after 5 years, they would deal with the really difficult issues that no one wanted to touch, which, of course, is Jerusalem, refugees, access to water, settlements, etc. And in the meantime, they divided up the West Bank into areas A, B, and C. So this, all the money that came in after Oslo was coming in with the idea that it was going towards building a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. So all these kinds of projects, governmental governance projects, went about, how do we have to teach Palestinians how to be able to run a state because they don't know. All different kind of projects ensued. And you still see that language, even though most people agree that the two-state solution is dead, you still see the state-building language very much present in the funders' discourse.
And so the funders are teaching the Palestinians how to run a democracy, is that it?
Yeah, it's really nice of them.
It does sound quite colonial, doesn't it?
This is a form of neocolonialism. This is what aid and development is in the majority of the global south, if not all. It is neocolonialism. It is a way for governments and countries to maintain their influence and stranglehold over native and indigenous populations. It's no different in Palestine.
Just the word development can be thought of through that lens. And you're developing, you're helping another country develop itself. Even
the language is quite similar to the civilizing mission of Portugal and the Portuguese Empire.
In 100 years, we're going to have post-development studies. So us is going to be the number one place to go and study post-development and post-aid.
Post-development as in...
Post-colonial.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you can, like, from all the people we've interviewed in the past few days, there's been like a clear idea that this money is being channeled not just into the private sector, as you were saying, in like the security forces, but also in terms of transforming the economy in like instead of investing in production or like agriculture, all of this that actually create value, kind of turn it into a more of a services-based economy. And is that done to like, is making Palestine dependent on products like food and all of these different things that they can't, it's not sustainable, is it?
Well, when we were talking about the prices in Ramallah earlier, I mean, this is a direct consequence of, of occupation, but also of one of the outcomes of Oslo, which was the Paris Protocol, which was the protocol that was written up to deal with the economic aspect. And what was agreed was that the Palestinians would continue using the Israeli shekel as currency, that Israel would have complete control over the customs union, which would mean that Israel could import its goods into the West Bank and Gaza very easily, but the other way around, not so easily. So Israel basically maintained complete control over the levers of the Palestinian economy. And I say it's not exactly a Palestinian economy. It's these sort of pockets of economy. It's not actually an economy. And so they control, like if prices go up in Tel Aviv, they go up here. If prices go down in Tel Aviv, they go down here. They don't go down.
If inflation goes up in Tel Aviv, it also goes up here.
Yeah. And the difference is, of course, that we also don't have the social securities in place that usually protect people from the worst aspects of the economy, right? Like there is no social protection, basically. So during COVID, for example, we have a whole... we have hundreds of thousands of Palestinian construction workers, builders, people who work in the construction industry that cross over into the 48 territories every day to work in Israel illegally, right? They're cheap labor for the Israelis. They don't have to provide them with insurance or healthcare or anything. And they earn very little money, so it's very easy. So going back to the services, and there has been no investment into production, as you said, right? So now it's all about services. Palestinian, like local produce, is expensive, more expensive than the Israeli produce usually. Also, we don't have a lot of agricultural produce because, of course, the most fertile area in the West Bank is what? It's the Jordan Valley. And the majority of the Jordan Valley is in Area C. And the Jordan Valley, like it costs the Palestinians billions and billions every year in loss of revenue because the Israelis have completely farmed the Jordan Valley. And that's, most of their export agricultural produce is from the Jordan Valley. So it's a huge loss to the, to the Palestinian economy again. So yeah. And obviously, there is always campaigns to encourage Palestinians to buy Palestinian goods, and it's part of BDS as well. But there aren't enough products to sustain the entire population. So even if everyone woke up tomorrow and decided they would not buy a single Israeli or foreign product, there are not enough Palestinian products to feed.
But I think it's also like not a demand of the BDS movement that the Palestinians that live in Palestine only buy Palestinian products. Isn't it more like an international movement?
It is, but the demand locally is that where possible, avoid. Because there's also this very internalized colonialism that we have as Palestinians, that everything we do is not good enough. So our products aren't good enough. So this will commonly, you'll hear this, that Palestinians will always say Israeli milk tastes better. Okay? I don't drink milk, so I don't know. But I don't think it's necessarily true. Like, I think it's just this, and it's the same with the Western brands as well. Like, it just tastes better, it's cleaner.
Is it also the same with the leadership of NGOs and organizations? Because if you look at the leadership of the NGOs, it always seems like there's no Palestinians there.
Well, at the international NGOs? Yeah, of course, there would be no Palestinians. Why would you allow the native population to be in charge of anything? No, there are no directors of any international organizations are Palestinian. There was only one of Amnesty International, Saleh Hijazi, maybe one or two others. But yeah, the majority of the leadership, the senior leadership in international organizations is...
and why is that?
Because it's about decision making. It's a hierarchical system, and at the top of you can't have someone who's biased, who's Palestinian, who, I don't know, might like upset the balance. And then you would have to pay a Palestinian. Like, what about what you would pay them? There is, in most organizations, there's a difference between international salaries and local salaries, and the gap between them is massive. It's huge.
Like how huge?
Well, listen, I think it depends, but I know, for example, in UN agencies, it's really, really big, the gap. So like we can talk just a third at least. Like, so a person who's doing the same job international will get $3,000, the local will get $1,000, just as an example.
At UN agencies like UNRWA, for example?
Yeah.
And what would you say to some people say that the reasons for that are because it's, on the one hand, it's you need to pay these international workers what they're expecting from their original countries, and on the other hand, that it can be dangerous to pay a Palestinian the same you're paying to the international workers. What do you think about those two reasons?
I mean, it's not unique to Palestine that this happens, right? Like, it happens all over the global south, and the arguments for maintaining that imbalance or that inequality between salaries is bullshit. Like, you have someone, an international coming, an expat coming to live in somewhere, and they should be paid according to local salaries and local prices, right? Realistically. Not like someone from London is being paid, like, I don't know, moves to Ghana and is being paid a London salary. Like, they're millionaires, right? Like, but why should that be the case?
It's like in Lebanon now. I mean, the currency devalued 10 times. And
yeah, Lebanon's a disaster.
Like, we as Portuguese, with the very average Portuguese salary in Lebanon, were rich.
Yeah.
We were there in
I never felt that in my entire life.
I never felt so privileged in my life. Like, and I mean, the salaries of the directors, or I mean, the top positions at UNRWA was just much higher than our salaries when they're hiring like local Palestinians in the Burj Al Baraj and the refugee camps.
UNRWA is probably one of the places where you will see some of the biggest disparities in terms of salaries.
But why is that? I mean, it's an agency that was created for the Palestinian question.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also UN. And why was the UN established? Like, who was it established by? Like, it's a UN agency. The heads of the UN agencies aren't going to be, like, the head of UNRWA can't be a Palestinian. And their argument is that if it was a Palestinian, like, the Israelis would, like, take it down, right? I think that's not entirely honest, right? Like, I don't think they want locals as heads or in senior positions. There are always exceptions to the rule, right? There is, I'll know someone here or there that's a Palestinian that has a senior position. There are always exceptions, but those exceptions prove the rule. The fact that they're an exception, just demonstrates that.
But what's the role of the UNRWA then?
What's the role of UNRWA? It's a service provider for refugees where, the reason they created a distinct agency was to make sure that, the Palestinian refugees would be, to highlight that Palestinian refugees aren't just like any other refugees, right? And to keep the Palestinian refugee question or the right of return alive. But as it stands now, UNRWA functions as a service provider for refugees. And
so there's no political strategy or action to make sure the right of return is implemented?
No, it's not part of their mandate. UNRWA's mandate is nothing to do with the right of return. UNRWA's mandate is to provide services for the refugees.
But when we talk to activists, and most of the activists from local communities in Khalil or in Beit Lahem, I think nobody said something different to UNRWA's role is to maintain the status quo. But again, like, they are a agency for the Palestinian refugees, so it's weird, that, isn't it?
That what?
That they are keeping the status quo, or if the role is the status quo, while they're working for the refugees. The
status quo is, I think what they mean about the status quo is to sort of protect the Palestinian right of return from disintegrating, from keeping it a question. Because if it wasn't brought into question, these people wouldn't be refugees. They would just be considered like impoverished working class communities. So I think what they mean, these activists, when they're talking to you about the status quo, is they keep that question alive. They keep the refugeehood of Palestinians alive. And for a lot of people, that sounds awful. Like, why wouldn't you want to extinguish your refugeness? But the fact is that these refugees, their homes and lands still exist. And so for many Palestinian refugees, they want to maintain their refugee status so that their right to return is preserved. Because as soon as they stop being refugees, they don't have a right to return.
Then what happens is you turn it into a humanitarian crisis and not a political one.
And UNRWA is also guilty of that, right? Like, UNRWA is, Palestinians have a very complicated relationship with UNRWA, right? They employ a lot of people. So obviously, they are providers. They are also service providers.
30,000, I think they say on the website. Yeah,
it's also part of our, in a way, it's a part of our culture. Like, a lot of people went to UNRWA schools. Like, it's just, a lot of people's parents work for UNRWA. Like, it's just a big part of, they are a part of Palestinian life. But there are also so many, it's still a UN agency. So there are also so many negatives, not least the ones that I mentioned with the disparities between the leadership and the salaries, etc. But they're also, as an agency, it's also guilty of turning the Palestinian refugee question into a humanitarian question rather than a political one, because they're very increasingly so, because of the pressures as well that they have from the donor community, they are depoliticizing UNRWA.
When we were in the Burj Al Barajne camp, we heard from the local people that UNRWA removed the Palestinian history and Nakba from the curriculums. They also forbid Palestinian flags from getting into the schools at the camps. Does that surprise you?
So the issue of textbooks, Palestinian textbooks, is a big one when it comes to the donor community.
Both in Palestine and outside of Palestine.
Both in Palestine and outside of Palestine. Now, it's used often as a tool to attack UNRWA. So the Israeli regime and the Zionist lobby say that Palestinian school books are often incite to violence, often promote terrorism, erase the existence of the State of Israel, etc. And, there have been many studies, including by European commissions and independents, who've been shown that this is not the case. But regardless, the pressure has been so intense that the school books have been watered down completely, and things from Palestinian national history have been completely removed. And there is such a focus on these school books because the Israeli regime's narrative is that that UNRWA is just a hotbed of radicalism. It's radicalizing generations of Palestinian refugees in their schools. That's their narrative, and it's effective. It's effective because it's had a direct impact on the school books, but also that it's expanded beyond UNRWA, and they've even used that critique about Palestinian Authority government schools. So there have been also constraints there as well.
Also, like in the names of the schools, even, I think.
We've heard
But it's interesting that there's this two big criticisms of UNRWA. So the Zionist lobby says that UNRWA is radicalized. The local activists say UNRWA is not radicalized enough.
Yeah, that's often the case. Yeah. It's a difficult balance to get right, is to critique an organization such as UNRWA, but also not play into the hands of the Zionist lobby. And it's a difficult balance, and it's often that balance is not achieved. But it's something that, it's just a very unfair, that position that Palestinians are constantly put in, like critiquing the international presence here when a lot of that international presence is providing a service. But that presence at the same time is being attacked by the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime. So it's a very unfair position that Palestinians constantly find themselves in.
There's another thing that it's, and I don't know if this is just because I'm more aware of this, or it's because something that has been playing more and more in Palestine. But I've been feeling from talking to different organizations and different local activists that, especially on this particular subject and on the subject of working with Organization X, either by getting funded or being a partner of them, really creates a lot of tension between them. And you go to activist A that say, well, activist B works with a Zionist organization, and activist B say, well, the other guy who is the one who works with this one that has conditional funding, and they accepted that conditional funding. And then another one say, well, they all say this, but in fact, none of them is radical enough, because what you should do is actually not get funding at all and work just as a volunteer. Do you also feel that is playing a part as a result in this in the struggle for Palestinian freedom?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of toxic discourse that exists, I think, in all movements, and I think it's a problem of the left globally that they haven't managed to really control that toxicity. Like, you're not radical enough, so we're like, khalas, we're going to cut you out. I think there are clear red lines, okay? I think, you work for a Zionist organization, fuck you. Like why? There's no need to. And that those red lines have, they do have a consensus behind them. But inevitably in this kind of situation, there is going to be competition, because we're fighting for funding. And I think it's important that we try and work against that competitive atmosphere. But it's very difficult, especially for some organizations who are literally, struggling to get any funding. Of course, there's going to be, competitiveness. And there's also going to be political differences. I think that's also, Palestine is a pluralistic society. Like, of course, there's going to be political differences between different groups of people. I don't think it's as antagonistic as... I don't think, as you made out, it's as antagonistic as that. I think, Palestinian civil society organizations also do work a lot together, like usually not in the most efficient or effective way. But I do think we're a very small society, and a lot of those who work for the NGOs, or the muassasat, as we say in Arabic, come from a certain class of people as well, like lower middle class to upper middle class. So I do think there's also a lot of social cohesion. But the competition, of course, is always going to be an element when the funding is so tight.
Acabaste de ouvir uma entrevista com a investigadora Yara Hawari, gravada em 2022, durante a produção da série Indústria da Ajuda na Palestina, que podes ouvir em qualquer aplicação de podcasts. Esta entrevista foi feita por mim, Rafaela Cortês, e pelo Ricardo Esteves Ribeiro. A Margarida David Cardoso cortou-a e escreveu isto que te estou a ler. O Bernardo Afonso editou o som. Joana Teresa Batista fez a identidade gráfica. O Lucas Grimaldo de Freitas, a estratégia de comunicação, e o Fred Rocha tratou do website. Consulta em fmaca.pt a série completa, um monte de outras entrevistas, visualizações de dados e uma extensa lista de livros, filmes e podcasts que nos foram úteis nesta investigação. Fazem ainda parte da equipa Fumaça, António Assunção, Luís Marquês, Maria Almeida e Nuno Viegas. Até já!